what kind of training did you do? Riding, fighting, weapons? Remember, I've been asking something similar about your muscles on Instagram.
First of all, the training, number one priority is learning how to ride a motorcycle, which I did not know prior to. I mean, I always wanted a bike, but I never sort of had the permission to do it. You know, like your parents definitely don't want you riding a motorcycle. When I had the first audition, I had a temporary license, and then I signed up to do the course, and then I bought a bike, and then that became just a part of my life. And then, of course, when I talked to Charles, and he's talking about, you know, these 100 mile an hour, well, no, more than 100 mile an hour, but like these rides for like 8 hours where you're just going full tilt, like he should ask him about the riding aspect. It sounds like it's harder than the actual, I don't know, fights or, you know, infiltrate in the gang. The riding itself is a huge part of the show. The fighting, I was training with a boxing coach, because when you're doing a film or TV, a lot of it is just sort of like big flaring. There's not a lot of grappling. So you want to definitely have clean strokes across the lens. So I thought boxing would be one of the best things to sort of train with. And then, yeah, I mean, there's no like training that goes into infiltrating a gang other than just being aware of when you're lying, you know, and just sort of clocking that on a day-to-day basis. It's amazing like how many little lies we tell throughout the day that we know that we're lying, but we're not really catching ourselves in those lies. So I was just trying to sort of sense when I'm lying and what are like my tell signs. And then also a big part of it is like sort of leaning into the vulnerability of the lies, you know, like to not put a cover on top of it and to just sort of sit in it and see how other people react. Because I think, and I'm sure Charles can speak better to this, but a lot of these interactions with people, especially when it comes to lying, it's what's going on in between your ears as opposed to what's going on between their ears. You know, if you're constantly going, I'm lying, you're going to get busted. But if you're sitting there watching how the other person responds, then you have a better chance to think faster on your feet, essentially.
Maybe Charles could add up something to this question about riding, finding weapons.
Yeah, I mean, Damon, though, just put it perfectly on getting ready for undercover work, which is, you know, making sure your lies are straight, you're not lying too much, you're listening good. Yeah, he hit that perfect. But on the riding, he did great. He was riding in most of the scenes. And a Harley, you know, you're going to have to start on a smaller bike. A Harley's not an easy bike to learn on. And especially like in season 2 when he had the 16-inch apes and it was -5 degrees out and your hands are numb, and the riding, I'm sure for Damon, was probably one of the hardest parts of doing the show, just because of, you know, having a big bike, having apes, but it was also the hardest part of doing the infiltration. These guys were dying. I was going to funerals probably every 5 weeks. 90% of the time it was these guys dying on the motorcycle, 10% was being murdered. You know, they just ride, they're drunk, they're high, and we're going 110, 115 miles per hour, you know, the entire ride. It's exhausting, and then maybe they've been up a day or two, and they're riding at those speeds. And when you're working and doing that undercover work, you're staying up as well too. You know, you're trying to match their speed, and then you're riding in a pack, so you're 7 feet from each other's back wheels. So if someone hits the brakes, you know, you're going to go into each other and all go down. And something you probably read from the book, Ivan, is, you know, I broke my neck, and it was something that I figured if I was going to get seriously hurt or killed, it would first be, you know, on the motorcycle.
Absolutely makes sense. Basically, I've watched the series at least twice, and I read the book at least 3 times. And the last one was last night. I was revising and was delving deeper into those situations, and I was like, what the fuck is going on? This guy is really tough. I mean, he's got some balls, because one thing is watching the series and the other thing, reliving those events in real life.
Let me ask, Charles, did you ever want to quit on the bike? Or did you ever like pull off to the side and sort of think about it?
I wanted to. You know, I wanted to quit all the time riding with those guys. I thought they were idiots, you know? I was like, every time you're doing it, it's like being on a roller coaster and you're just saying, oh shit. It's basically an oh shit moment for the whole ride, where you're like, well, I almost that car. Well, we almost rear-ended each other. Well, you know, I was just hit by a partial tire or a rock, or a bee stings me in the face when it smashes into you. Yeah, it wasn't a pleasant experience. You know, I love riding, but not at 120 miles per hour and splitting through traffic.
It's funny, in the first season when we were in Arizona, and well, Charles there, but they had me do like these solo rides where I was just like riding into the sunset essentially, right? And they're coming in on your face and they're catching your wheels and all this stuff. And like the first time I go out, I start like crying because I'm like, I can't believe I'm doing this. This is so fun. And then at that exact moment, this bee like flies up my arm and stings me. And I'm like I didn't know how to respond because I wasn't even thinking about it. And the director was like, what's wrong with you? Like, what happened? I'm like, oh, a bee stung me. And he's like, so what? I'm like, well, you're not expecting it when you're riding, it's startling.
So basically you've been talking about the bee actually. So when you hit the bee, the normal life is just normal. But basically when you're riding a bike or something, it turns into some kind of a bullet, yeah?
Yeah, I mean, it's burning. You don't know if the bee is still inside your jacket, But I mean, obviously in real life you can deal with it. But when the camera's rolling, you're like, I just keep going, like pretend it's not happening.
Yeah, makes sense. But
well, you get to eat bugs as well too. Rocks feel like a bullet, when you're going that fast, and especially if you're not using a full face helmet. And then by the time you're done with the ride, oil's all over in your face because Harleys leak. So the Harleys in front of you are kind of dumping oil on you. That's why you try to wear the bandana or something else, because otherwise you're just gonna have this round mouth and nose and everything else.
I'm just curious. So basically, before becoming an outlaw biker, Charles, how did you train? How did you prepare for it? Because if I'm not mistaken, you were a meth addict, then you were busted, and then you were suggested a deal. And afterwards, you infiltrated those gangs.
Yeah, I was a criminal most of my adult life until I was 30. So from about 19 to 30, I was more of a mobster. Well, first of all, I grew up in a Hispanic neighborhood in LA. So I was around gang members since an early age, and a working class Mexican area in LA. So I kind of grew up in a barrio. And so I was around criminals from a young age. I didn't use hard drugs myself at first. I was a successful drug dealer, coke smuggler. In fact, I worked for Russian and Bulgarian mobsters, mostly in LA, Ivan. And then I saw that methamphetamine was starting to take over the market. So I said, well, I got to learn how to make it. And I still wasn't really into using hard drugs by then. About the age 28, about 28, I said, you know what? I want to get out of this lab as quick as I can. So I'm going to use meth to stay up. I'm cooking so I can get it done quicker, so it's less of a risk. Clean up the lab and get done. And then, of course, I became addicted myself. And that was for about 2 years. So most of my criminal career I wasn't. But being around gang members, mobsters, and stuff like that, I already knew the mentality. The only thing I had to change is mobsters, they're not looking at power as much as they're looking at is how much money they can make. The power is more just to protect you and make sure people don't steal from you. So everyone's kind of got to fear you. For the one percenters in the US, it's more about having the power. So I just had to look at it, okay, if I cared more about power, how would I act? And I had to go into it like that. And the only reason I survived on a motorcycle is I grew up riding dirt bikes. And so that otherwise, I don't think I would have made it through it. But yeah, I think just being around criminals your whole life, you understand the mentality. I was around a lot of Hispanic gang members. To me, the one percenters, they're just gang members on bikes. And so I just treated it that way and just try to make myself think. Now I almost like an acting role where I need to look at it more from the point of view as I'm doing it for power instead of money. That makes sense.
Yeah, that makes sense. Here is another interesting question. My channel is mostly dedicated to all those mob-related movies and mob-related series.
If you want Gangland Undercover back, now's the time. Post on any social media, a clip, a photo, a selfie with the Fight for Falco hashtag, or even just a text post. Share this video with friends, like, subscribe, and check the comments for all the links. Together, we can make Season 3 happen. Let's make some noise. Together, we're a force.